So we've been left without our maternal figure. So we're going to go through a few of the stories that have made the headlines this week. But Eamon, you've been down all week at the trial of Ruth Lawrence. And today we heard about the circumstances in which the bodies of the two murdered men were found.
Yeah, so this is Ruth Lawrence. She's charged with the murders of Owen O'Connor and Anthony Keegan in April 2014, so it's quite some time ago. So like we've been talking about this during the week, this is day 4 of evidence that we got. So this is actually, they believe they more or less, the family we heard yesterday, Owen O'Connor's brothers, they were concerned immediately for his safety on the 22nd of April. So essentially at that point it was a Garda missing persons case. And then, so we move forward to the 18th of May, so the following month in 2014, and there was a gentleman called Pat Smith gave evidence. He'd been out fishing on Lough Sheelin on a boat. There was he knew a couple of people out there. They were out in the boats, just I suppose chilling out, doing a bit of fishing.
Yeah.
And they decided to have a break, so they moved in close to this island, Inchicup Island. Now they didn't go on it, but they just went kind of the lee side of it to shelter a bit from the wind for a cup of tea. He said it's not an island you go on. It's boggy and all the rest of it. So they were kind of facing into the wind, and he said there was a dreadful smell coming from it. And he said it's about 100 metres from the shore, he was explaining, and he knew that the week before that the Garda subaqueous unit had been diving in the lake up the way, as he put it. So he decided then that the odour was so bad that they actually moved away, and he decided the next day to ring a sergeant that he knew. He was in Summerhill. So Pat Smith was in Trim. He rang Michael Bennett, the sergeant. So we heard his statement as well. And he said that he gave in his statement, he was saying that Pat Smith's attention was drawn to it, and he knew that the smell wasn't animals because he'd previously worked as a butcher. Right. So Kells Station were then informed about it. So
I mean, obviously Ruth Lawrence is on the trial for the gun murder of two men, Owen O'Connor and Anthony Keegan, as you said, and we've heard the prosecution case, basically that they were travelled up to this part of the world, to Cavan, to collect a drug debt. There was €70,000 that was owed by Jay Sims and Neville van der Westhuizen, who was Ruth Lawrence's boyfriend at the time. So anyway, so we had then it was a short time later, about a week later. Then the guards then they had one of their boats. Was tasked to go out. They brought out a dog handler. So we had, I suppose it was a slight moment of light relief. But when Paul Conroy, he's now retired, he was in the dog unit, and he had a German Shepherd called D4, which he explained that was the dog's name, D for dog. So he was known as D4. Wasn't it D4 sort of?
No, he was D4. Anyway, was trained to find missing people, and he was alerted to go to Mount Nugent, which is this area not too far from Ballyjamestuff. It's close to St. Patrick's Cottage, where Ruth Lawrence was living at the time. He said they arrived at the island. They're trying to find a place they could land. It was very dense, heavy with wood. They found they identified an area between trees where they could get off, and he got himself and the dog off and onto the island, and he asked then the subaqueous unit to move back away from the island so that their odours wouldn't I suppose interfere with what the dog was doing. He says almost immediately he had his head in the air and gave him an indication, which was to stare. So he's staring at a spot. He called him back over to him and told him to go again to search, and he went straight back to the same spot. So it was a strong indication at that point. He instructed the dog to lie down. He approached the area. He kind of said he could see this kind of 6 foot long, maybe 4 foot wide kind of area. It was covered with branches, and he can make out some kind of plastic coverings. And he asked then the Aqua unit members to come back to investigate more. Now, all of this was being shown to the jury in a book of photographs they had, which we don't get to see on the media bench, or anyone else in court doesn't get to see it. But so the jury are probably having a clearer picture of this. They started moving branches about and saw more of the coverings. He says they didn't take too much away because he's aware that this could be of evidential value. He said there was a bad odour, and he could see blue bottles coming out of a hole. So they made a couple of phone calls to explain what they had seen.
So there was no attempt to bury the bodies then, obviously?
No, there was nothing from this evidence that we know that there was any attempt. And he said like when they went back then and they collected other officers, they brought out the scenes of crimes person, and they started taking away more of the material, and this officer, the dog handler, Paul Conroy, he had a Leatherman tool, one of these kind of it's got various tools on it. When there's a knife, and he handed it to one of the crime scenes person who cut open some of the plastic, and an arm fell out. So it was declared a crime scene after that.
So very graphic evidence then at this point. Then we had further witnesses or evidence about the circumstances in which the bodies were found.
Yeah, I suppose it's not so much. They're kind of going through all of the various strands of the prosecution case. I mean, there was, there's a lot of formal stuff. There's about 13 witnesses today. Yeah. So I mean, we've mentioned 3 of them there.
Yeah.
But you would have had then, the guard then who was kind of tasked to stay on the island overnight to preserve the crime
so
scene.
It's very procedural.
Yeah, and then there, and give evidence about the bodies were transferred by boat into an ambulance or into a hearse rather, and then brought to, I think it was a hospital in Navan, to the mortuary there, and awaiting the arrival of Dr. Mary Cassidy and Michael Curtis. They were going to carry it out. But before we heard from the dog handler, we also heard from a man called Peter van de Westhuizen, who was described as Neville van de Westhuizen's his father.
And we've heard before the prosecution case is obviously that Ruth Lawrence was involved in the shooting, but it's also their case that Neville van der Westhuizen was also involved in that shooting.
Yeah, I mean, the state, as in Michael O'Higgins' opening statement, he said that she had fired a shot at Owen O'Connor, and while it wasn't immediately fatal, that van der Westhuizen then is alleged to have finished him off or have shot him as well, and he having previously shot Anthony Keegan at that point.
And they've also described how he subsequently left the country and
we actually get some of this, and this is, I suppose, this explains some of that, from the prosecution's point of view to the jury, that now his statement was read out. He explained that he had been in Ireland since 2000. He worked in Liffey Meats in the county, and that Neville and another of his son had moved from Durban to Ireland, and that for a time they'd lived with him, and they'd worked in the factory as well at some stage. And at this point in time, in April 2014, he said he'd only hear from Neville when he needed something, and the previous time he'd heard from him was the previous summer when it was his birthday, and he knew he had a girlfriend called Ruth, but didn't know her surname. And he says that particular week he didn't have any callers until Thursday, and at 7 p.m. on that Thursday, Neville's black BMW, he saw drive up, and a small green Nissan Micra driven by a girl he knew previously as Stacey Sims. So she's the daughter of Jason Sims, who we've already heard about previously in the court case. And he was saying like the white van also drove in, and that was being driven by Jason Sims, who Peter van de Westhuizen describes as nervous and jumpy, and that Neville then was looking for €100 for petrol. He said he had to go to Cavan. He said he could only give him €50. He said, Ruth was quiet, but as I said, Jason was kind of jumping. They all left. He came back later that day, and again, I think it was later. It was 1:20 a.m. and he was looking for any more money he might have had, and he said he only had €10 to go, and he said he didn't see them again. The next morning, the van and the Micra were left parked at the back of the flats, and he hadn't had contact with any of them since. But there was another gentleman also gave evidence. So this is on the same day, the Thursday. Ashraf Lewis, he was also a South African. He was originally from Cape Town, and he arrived in Ireland around 20 years ago. And he knew Neville because he'd met him in Ireland. They were both fellow South Africans, so they got to know each other. He worked in KFC, and it was heard in court that the Gardaí interviewed him about a lot of matters, but they only wanted him to talk about this trip he'd made to Rosslare on Friday the 25th of April. And he said Neville had called him, and he asked him for money. He didn't say why. And so he told him he was in Rosslare at the Ferrell terminal. So Ashraf Lewis, he drove from Cavan to there, handed him the money. Neville met him there, got out of a car. He thinks there was another man and 2 women in the car. He got out, approached him, gave him the money, and he just left and went home. And that kind of puts the couple, that puts Ruth Lawrence in Rosslare, or rather it puts Neville in Rosslare, which the state has already said in their opening statement that they left Rosslare, went to London, and then on to South Africa, where they lived for a couple of years.
So, well, it's a trial. We'll keep coming back to Eamon next week, and it's expected I think it's scheduled to go on for at least another 3 to 4 weeks anyway, is it?
Well, it's the 14th of November is what the jury is being told, and like they're back in Monday morning, and the jury are also told that on Tuesday the judge, I think, was reassuring them that there was a bit of a delay. There was supposed to be hearing more witnesses this afternoon, and it didn't happen, and he was trying to reassure the jury that everything was on schedule. It wouldn't be impinging on their time going forward, and he said there'd be a substantial witness taking the stand. Or they'd be hearing from a substantial witness on Tuesday, and that this day next week they're going to be the prosecution case is going to be well on the way.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that, Eamon, for sure. So, Eimear, you've kept quiet now for nearly 10 minutes.
I know,
that must be a total and utter. You must be going.
Excuse me, I'm as Nicola Toll said before, I'm very unassuming. Is that the word she used? I'm very quiet.
Is that what she said?
Yeah, it's only when you're winding me up.
That's what she said in front of your face, anyway.
So she called me mild-mannered.
Did she? Mild-mannered, yeah. She doesn't sit beside you enough then. That's so.
I didn't want to interrupt Eamon's flow. He gives me the eyes when I'm annoying him.
But it has actually been a busy week again, hasn't it, in the newsroom, because the courts are back and it makes a huge difference. Just that flow of cases picking up again, and particularly as you get to the end of the week, some of them sort of get closer to the end.
Yeah.
But we did have a breaking story today about the Mike Gaine case, which there was huge interest in, obviously, at the time.
Yeah.
He was a farmer farmer from County Kerry. Mm-hmm. He went missing for a number of weeks before his body was eventually found dismembered in a slurry tank, and it was very much a mystery about what happened. In the middle of all that, I suppose an American man, Michael Kelly, was questioned by Gardaí, and subsequently did a number of interviews with the media where he described himself as a suspect, but definitively declared himself not involved and an innocent man, and said he was wrongly being targeted. And he had, a go at the Gardaí and said what happened to him. He said what happened to him was unfair. And he lodged a complaint at the time, didn't he?
He did, yeah. So that was reported in earlier in recent months that he lodged a complaint. But basically, this is Ken Foy's story today that's just gone up on SundayWorld.com about how Michael Kelly has dropped that complaint. So yeah, he lodged a complaint to FISRU, they're formerly GSOC, and they investigate complaints made by members of the public about the conduct of Gardaí in investigating cases. So basically, this is alleged to have happened before Michael Kelly was arrested. So as we know, Michael Gaine went missing at the end of March, and then his body parts were found on his farm in, I think it was May, so it was nearly 2 months that he was missing. And obviously the Gardaí had conducted interviews across this investigation before they found the body parts, after they found them, and then obviously they arrested Michael Kelly then shortly after Michael Gaine was discovered. So Ken's writing that the complaint comes from before he was arrested, and obviously it was something that was going to be investigated, but
and do we know what the complaint was about? I mean, I think he did speak about it. Michael Kelly saying it was about the manner in which he was questioned.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. It was about how he was spoken to. We don't know exactly what was said to him by the guards, but yeah, it was just how he was treated by Gardaí when they were interacting with him. And he, as you said, he was very critical in interviews that he gave to the media about the Gardaí, about their investigation, saying it was flawed, saying he had nothing to do with it, that they got the wrong guy and that they were focusing too much on him. So he has been very vocal. And the complaint is centred around his interaction with them.
So it's a very complex case to solve, and we've spoken about one of why something like this is so hard to make progress on. Firstly, because it's a very isolated part of the world, so there's no kind of natural witnesses. A lot of the murder trials we've seen in recent times have been solved by CCTV and mobile phone evidence.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that there's no CCTV, you can say for sure, and mobile phones don't seem to be of help.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is a difficult one, yeah. And Gardaí, as Ken has said, reported today, sources are very concerned that they may never solve this case because, as you said, there's no CCTV. There was CCTV of Michael Gaine in a shop in Eimear that morning, and then his car, his vehicle, his phone and his wallet were found in the car. He was missing for the guts of, I think it was over 2 months. And then they had search tanks on his land, but there was, very small remains in the tank, and because of the nature of things, that wasn't discovered until after body parts were found in his land. So the investigation is very confusing, obviously very wide ranging, and I think the concern is now obviously Michael Kelly is a self-appointed suspect. He's admitted that he's a suspect, but there's a lot of questions about how this happened to Michael Gaine, where he went after the shop, and
is Michael Kelly? He was busking on the streets of, was it Tralee? In the aftermath of it, he left the area, but he was still talking to journalists if they approached him, and maybe less friendly than he was initially, but he was still certainly chatting away. Yeah,
he was, and we spoke to him. Several papers spoke to him, but we spoke to him, and he was staying in accommodation around Tralee, and he was in the area performing as busker. It's reported that now he's sort of keeping the head down, that he's not really giving interviews anymore.
Yeah.
That, obviously he's withdrawn this complaint. It's also been reported that this doesn't mean that, Fitzroy can open up if this complaint is relodged. He was arrested in relation to the investigation, but he's a free man at the moment. He's an innocent man, so he is entitled to re-enter that complaint if he wants, and then it'll be followed up on.
When Gardaí are investigating a murder, they're also entitled to ask people.
Of course, but I just mean that he can put that back in. But as we know at the moment, the complaint's dropped, and he is keeping his head down in Tralee.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other big stories, Eamon, this week, and Eimear, would have been the stabbing of a young man in an apartment block. That very, very tragic case where a 17-year-old, I think, has been arrested today, has he? Yeah, so a 17-year-old has been arrested. He was actually taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. So the Gardaí were waiting for him to be released from hospital. So now he's been arrested. He's been arrested on suspicion of the murder of another 17-year-old. The 17-year-old has been named now as Vadim Davydenko. They were in two-slough accommodation in Donaghmede. Yeah. And Vadim Davydenko had come from Ukraine only 4 days previously. So very sad case. There was other teenagers there at the time. They're being questioned, or not questioned, they're being interviewed by specialists, Gardaí as well, to help with the case. Yeah. So, obviously quite a tragic case there, and there's a the Gardaí have been investigating that. That happened on, I think it was Wednesday. So it's been, there's been a lot of stories on it, but it seems that a row may have started over food and escalated, and obviously there was another person injured, but not very seriously, who's now being released from hospital as well. Yeah, so the teenager that's been arrested today was released. Was injured, but didn't suffer life-threatening injuries. And there was also a female worker who was in the accommodation, was injured, but not in a life-threatening way either. So anything else that's caught your eye during the week, Eamon? Any other stories that have generated interest from you? Well,
of course, I was at the Criminal Access Bureau hearing this week as well. In between, things fell, luckily enough.
So busy, Eamon.
Well, between murder trials, there was a slight delay, luckily enough. So I was able to get the Criminal Access Bureau hearing. So there was a few things. We'll have one or two. We had a little piece about a gentleman called Jamie Gagan from Clondalkin. He's been targeted by a cab at the minute. He was actually brought to court with prison officers from Mountjoy, and he was there just to say, no, I'm not contesting it. And it was two cars, really, a Golf and a Skoda Superb.
Quite a young man,
modular.
Though,
he's a young man, and I expect we should have a little bit more information. But I mean, there is that piece up on SundayWorld.com. Like, he's serving a 6.5-year sentence at the moment for his part in kidnapping a man who was stabbed and tortured. Now, he pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and assault causing harm, but his DNA wasn't found on any of the weapons. But this gentleman was found hooded and in a bad state by Gardaí.
A very serious case, he would be a name that's quite well known for.
They says, the cab put the case forward that he's a drug dealer and involved in the sale and supply of drugs in Clondalkin, in that area.
And a former footballer again, Eamon.
Yeah, I mentioned that he was well, like I mentioned in the case from Dublin Circuit Court from whenever it was a couple of years ago now, that he played for the homeless team, the Ireland homeless team, but he was also an underage soccer player. He was a tall chap, he was a big guy.
We had long running banters where I would point out that these guys are always. It's always brought into their defence they were a talented former footballer, and it was never brought into their defence, Eamon, that they were former talented rugby players. Very much rarer, wasn't it?
Oh, you're trying to get me over rugby again. Anyway, we've a big weekend coming up as rugby fans.
He gets at me over GAA as well.
So I mean, it was a serious case, but I suppose a slightly less serious case. In fact, a definitely less serious case. We had a merging of TikTok and the criminal courts this week.
Yeah, we did. So we had a story about, I think this was one you came across actually, Alex Nolan. Alex Nolan was up in courts at the start of last week, I think, for basically counterfeit. It was under the Theft and Fraud Act, but essentially what he was doing was he was going into shops and he would buy like a drink, like something very small, and would hand in a €50 note, what they thought was a €50 note, and would get like €47 back. And then went in and did it another time, got like €45 back, and then did it a third time, and then they got suspicious and they realised they were counterfeit notes. So he obviously pleaded guilty and avoided jail for it. But I suppose the interesting element is that he has over 100,000 followers on TikTok and Instagram, and he does a lot of comedy sketches, and he put out a kind of, I wouldn't say he was extremely repentant. He did say he made a mistake, but he kind of
and look, admittedly, it's in the scale of criminal endeavours, it's right down the bottom.
No, he said it was a confusing time for him. He was very young, and he kind of wanted to tell his followers to go a better way and take him as an example. So
it was a funny kind of mea culpa, wasn't it? It was more a bit of sort of wellness and advice in the middle of it all, was there?
Yeah, it was. It was just. It was. I suppose it was a. It was a kind of a. It was deep and meaningful kind of explanation. I can't imagine you. If you wouldn't say sorry for something. Never mind go into such a deep explanation. But he basically said, "I hold up my hand to the mistake. Every action has a reaction, and the reason I'm making a video is because I feel like I have a lot of young followers, and I need to address this in the right manner." And he says he's not justifying anything. And he holds his hands up for that, and then kind of says you have to get on with your life. And he needs to make the video because I have the younger audience, and I feel like they look up to me, and I feel doing what I did isn't right, and I don't agree with any of it. And
in fairness, he is taking responsibility, but there's a touch of Gen X sort of apology
there
about
is.
it.
It's basically kind of,
Are we still on Gen X? I don't even know.
I don't know. But he's basically, he obviously understands, and he's confident enough to say he has a platform, and that he wants people to sort of take him as an example and not.
And look, it's clearly not. It's clearly not the greatest of crime.
No.
Another case that's come back into the media again is the trial of Terence Crosby, which is something we covered extensively at the time. Terence Crosby is a firefighter from Dublin. He was travelled over to Boston as part of a team from Dublin Fire Brigade to march in the St. Paddy's Day parade, obviously representing the country. But what happened was that he was, while they were staying in a hotel, he was arrested the day after in connection with a rape. There was a very high profile trial, but it's back. A retrial is now begun.
Yeah, it was essentially a hung jury. They couldn't come to a decision. So he's still over in Boston. It was March of last year that the incident took place, so it's been a long time. But yeah, the complainant in the case alleges that she'd went back to a hotel with his roommate, with Terence Crosby's roommate. They had consensual sex. They fell asleep, and she alleges she woke up to Terence Crosby raping her. He denies it completely. So the opening statements have just been this week.
Yeah, and again, a lot of it will hinge on the fact that DNA evidence, while they did take a sample from the woman, they didn't. His defence lawyers say this week again that there is no. They didn't get a match from Terence Crosby at all. A lot of the facts aren't in dispute in terms of the woman was in the room. You can see there's CCTV of him going into the room, but the core fact is deeply in dispute.
Yeah, it's there's 2 DNA male profiles, and one is confirmed as being the roommate that the woman had consensual sex with, and then they're claiming that there's no DNA linking him to the case, and then obviously her legal team are claiming that they're trying to say that the DNA profile belongs to him, but there's the defense is that there's no physical.
And I don't think there is a match. There's
no.
They're making
that there's a profile there, but there's no physical evidence. And I suppose there's evidence that he left the room. You can see him sitting in the hotel in another, on his phone for a short time, and then he goes back into the room.
Yeah, but it's something we'll continue to follow as it goes on. It's a big case over there as well, I suppose, because of the Paddy's Day and the Irish connection. So we'll come back to that next week.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to do a podcast to make show you for your 50th birthday, so I'm just going to say happy belated 50th birthday.
Thanks very much. Eamon, do you want to get in on that, Eamon?
No, not really. Not that kind of sentimental.
No. We did have a lunch for you, but it was, yeah.
I remember 50.
Do you remember being 50? You look less than 50. You look younger than that.
Younger than that, yeah. Thanks very much. I like you, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.